I am headed to a place called Corning, California, where I will be doing an event, a dog competition event for the next period of time, next 10 days. I have to keep going here today. I can't really pull over because I'm already late to get here for this event. We have had huge storms here in our part of the world the last week, a little bit less. Actually, it wasn't storming last week. Well, it did too. It snowed while we were
Hello, check, check. So, everybody, can you hear me?
not sure whether I'm here or not. Mark, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? I was at the practice session, so at the
Yeah.
wrong place practicing with this, but now I'm on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
So
I hear you great. I don't know how long I'll be able to stay on. I'm driving through the most amazing place, Mark. I wish I could show you guys. Maybe I
right,
can. Maybe I
right.
can. Let's just see if I can turn this camera on. That's looking at me. I don't
Okay.
want that. Do you know where the
Right.
symbol to change
Yeah.
views
It should.
is on this?
Yeah. It should be on your phone. Should be at the bottom of the or. Oh. So did we drop? Did we lose you? Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't find it.
Right. All right. But
Bobby, did you say? I'm not sure where it is. I'm going to turn this off again. I don't really want it on while we're driving. Anyway, I think I'm in a little town called Bernie. If
mhm.
anybody that's online wants to look it up, and I told everybody, look it up, and I told everybody I'm between Mount Shasta, which is a volcano, huge, beautiful, and Mount Lassen. And it is just gorgeous here. I mean, flat out, unbelievably beautiful.
Right.
Well, I may have to go off, everybody. I'll come back on if I can, if I get lost. But why don't you throw some questions up? If you got something really important for me, put it up on the line. Otherwise, Mark's got a video he's going to show
Yes.
while I'm not on. And this isn't Bernie, by the way. I thought I was in Bernie. I don't know what town I'm in. Bernie's still up the road. It went Fort Crook, possibly, California. Anyway, um, I'm going to get into timber again here in a minute, and so that's why I'm worried that you'll lose me. Wow, this was a burn area to my right. Again, I really wish I could show you guys this. Any questions there, Mark, from anybody?
I see. I see. Alicia put up some thoughts here. I don't see a question, so yeah, I don't have a question yet.
Well, I'll just keep chatting until you lose me.
Okay.
Again, record-setting weather out here. I'm now.
Uh, when we lost you, so I think we can start a webinar. We can play a replay from our previous webinar. that people might enjoy. So we're not hearing you. So in the audience, people, would you type in if you can hear me? Um, then we will show the replay video from. This is a. This will be a great video that we have lined up for you. Really enjoy this. And okay, so Wayne, we are not hearing you, so I'll just go to the video that we have lined up, and then we can show that to the audience and see if you will enjoy this. So everybody, are you hearing the audio? Type in if the audio was clear, or did anybody did anybody hear it, see it? Just type in your thoughts. If you were not, just type in if the audio was clear or not. Let's try this.
Wednesday night series with Mark Shepard, and who has never missed a week of this, which is amazing. And again, if you've heard all the stories other times of everything he's been through, we're going to have fun tonight, and he's going to talk about forest ecology, restoration agriculture. A couple little announcements to get started. First, amazing webinar that's going on tomorrow, and it's not associated with EAT. I did send out a link to it in the announcements that I sent to all of you earlier in the week. But if you don't have that, don't worry. Go into your EAT site, and up in the right-hand corner, there's a little picture of yourself, a little icon. You click on that, there's a drop-down, and it'll show announcements, and you can look right there. And that'll give you the link to this webinar. And it is a webinar being done by Dr. Elaine Ingham. And Mark, you might just mention, you know her, and I don't well, so she's going to be talking about soils, and it's hosted by a couple of friends of ours, Raleigh Latham, and My Brain's Going Dead. Help me, Mark. Talked about it earlier today. Yes, Matt Powers. Right. So Raleigh and Matt will be the hosts. I'm sure Elaine is going to be doing most of the talking. It might go 2 hours long. That's how long it's scheduled. Mark's laughing a little bit because he's going to say a little bit about her speaking. But she's outstanding. There's over 1,000 registrants already for it. They will cut it off when 1,000 people get on it live. So if you want to get on it, I would come a little early to get on, but you should go and register. It's going to be great. These guys are sort of working together with us. They're not yet involved actively in EAT. However, it's likely they will be. We're not know for sure on that. And they may even host a segment that we do on a regular basis on some topic that we haven't discussed yet. But they're going to be real helpful and cooperate with us, and we're cooperating with them. And they're using our platform, which is this GoToWebinar platform, to do their webinar. So that's tomorrow. That's at noon Mountain Time. You're going to have to figure it out your time. For the U.S., it'd be 11 Pacific, 1 Central, to Easter. The last announcement. We are having our live event, our first Economic Action Team live event. And I'm going to look at the attendees very quickly again. I know that there's a couple of you that have already said you're flying out here. Which is really cool. Yeah, no, I don't. We have about 10 Dustins that are in this group, and there are a couple of them on here right now. There's a Dustin Hollis that's not on right now that's flying out. And we have a couple people flying from out of the country, and Tony K coming from Oregon. Anyway, it's going to be fun. It's 2 days. Saturday will just be a bunch of fun. Mark was actually out with us last year. And Mark, I have never published this yet, but I'm going to actually put it on your fireside chat that you did.
Oh, wow.
Put it on. It's really very cool. And we have a whole bunch of videos that Mark did when he's out there that we're also going to be publishing as a part of some courses that we're doing, and we'll probably put them on here with the team too. You guys are getting our best, and we'll put them on with that. Where Mark was looking around my farm, it was in this time of the year, and it had been dry just like it's been now through the whole summer. And he gave some really great restoration agriculture lessons as it relates to what he saw on my property. So that event's going on. You guys are all invited. It's free for you. We do have some places you can sleep. It's not like you're going to be staying in a hotel, but we've got bunking space for you if you'd like to come. There's a campground right down the road from us that's got hookups or whatever, but camping on site you can do also. So we'll figure that out. We'll pick you up at the airport if you want to be flying in on Friday. Probably not on Saturday because we'll be pretty busy. But anyway, that's our first event. Hopefully we'll have one in Mark's area sometime, and maybe next year in the spring or summer where it makes sense. We want to have one in your area, wherever you're at in the world. So anyway, that's all I have announcement-wise. I'm going to turn it over to Mark. He's got a lot of good stuff for us. So go for it. One last thing. Thank you to my staff. I say that. I can't say it enough. Mark from Bangladesh has not ever missed one of these for many, many hours. Thank you, Mark. Stephanie's here sitting with me. Deb's working in our house. And thanks, and thank you, Mark, and go for it. It's all yours.
All right. Hey, welcome, everybody. As you know, we've been covering the college curriculum on forest ecology. And, of course, we're doing it from the perspective of a restoration agriculture, landowner, manager, farmer, rancher, etc. The basic premise of restoration agriculture is that we can accomplish actual ecosystem restoration simultaneous with agricultural production. And the big key to this whole thing is doing ecosystem mimicry, plant community mimicry. We want to create systems that are the closest approximation to a natural system that we can get to, because we know that natural systems are going to take care of themselves all by themselves for all practical purposes, and then we just harvest the yields. Something just changed in my sound. Am I on or not? Somebody give me some feedback. Hello?
You're on, Mark. You're doing fine.
Thank you.
I don't know what it was.
You just muted. Okay.
I muted, so I'm going to mute again now.
Much of my inspiration came from J. Russell Smith, Tree Crops. He wrote it in 1926 when the U.S. was undergoing quite a bit of genuine starvation, hard times. A lot of folks were looking at different ways to produce food, and one of the things that really turned me on is he suggested that we come up with a permanent agriculture. And wow, look at that contraction right there, permanent agriculture. He suggested that we grow all our animal feed on trees and graze animals underneath. It's on the hilly slopes. Save annual agriculture for the flat land and just grow our grain crops and vegetable crops down on the flat land. So that kind of line of thinking led me to permaculture. I got this first edition hardcover of the Permaculture Designer's Manual. And when I first started learning about permaculture and training permaculture with Bill Mollison, the word meant permanent agriculture. And to me, of course, agriculture meant food. And one of the things that Bill said way back when in the Australian public television special, The Global Gardener, was that the aim is to create systems that are ecologically sound and economically profitable. That sentence right there has been the essence of my life's work ever since I first heard this way back in the 1980s. Because if we create a system that's ecologically sound, we won't be doing any harm to anything really. except for, you know, the individual animals that we might eat or plants that we might kill. By the way, I'll sing a song one of these days. I'll play it on the piano called "I Heard the Screams of the Vegetables." So if we create the systems that are ecologically sound, economically profitable, ecolonomics, ecologically sound and economically profitable. David Holmgren laid out a lot of the different principles that Bill Mawson first put out in the Permaculture Designer's Manual. And what we're working on a lot right here is observe, imitate, and interact, because what I've seen as the primary shortcoming in permaculture design as we see it today is a failure to actually observe nature as it actually is, and a failure to imitate nature, and then a failure to actually interact with it. Somehow permaculturists have come up with this idea that we have to create these plant communities, these guilds of systems, and that we set things in place, and we like stand back from this food forest and just watch it produce forever and ever and ever. Well, that's not how this planet works. So we're going to go through an actual observations of nature and actual imitations of nature, because if we're going to do restoration agriculture, we need to know what it is that we're trying to imitate, what it is that we're trying to mimic, and it has to be based on reality, not just some crazy ideas that we came up with. Of course, I wrote this book basically on that whole premise. We're going to mimic ecosystems and plant communities and harvest the yields from it. Now, I've done this week after week, and I'm going to continue to do this until I can run out of examples of what to give. But if we need to, if we want to observe and interact, we have to understand the difference between observation and a concept. An observation is something that you see, hear, taste, touch, smell, measure with instruments. You can observe through a period of time or observe a number of replications over and over again. Whereas a concept is an intellectual idea that we create. If you look at the term invasive species, most invasive species science is done looking through the lens of invasive. We're actually seeing an invasion, and then we do all kinds of science around this invasion. And that's not accurate science. We're not actually observing what's going on. We're seeing our concept invasion. We're seeing our concept played out in the real world. An example that I have from this, there's a person, a teacher who recently passed away, that in one sense, this is my talking with her. I haven't spoken with her in a long time. Very popular, talking about trees and the power of trees, how important they are in human culture and how we need them. I went to one of the workshops that she was at, and she walked up to this circle of trees, and all of a sudden, with the perfect woo-woo voices, like everybody stop. We're at a power vortex. This is a power vortex that's so amazingly, you know, this and that and the other thing, that the trees have responded by growing in a circle, embracing hearts around it. It just went on and on and on, and all the people in the group were totally spellbound. And I'm looking at this ring of trees. This is not the ring of trees she was looking at. And there, in the center of this ring of trees, was this the rotting remains of a stump. And then around it, you could see all these little these trees sprouting up, and each one of those trees came from one of those root buttresses. Now, if we're going to observe nature, we have to observe actual reality here. When I observe in this picture, I see this little flat stump. How do we know that a redwood tree, for example, gets turned into a stump? If it rips in a wind, it's going to be jagged and torn. We can observe redwood stumps over and over and over again, and we pretty much know that the only way a redwood stump gets sawed flat across is with a saw. Somebody cut that tree down. Well, then many trees respond by sending up these root sprouts from the roots or from the base of the stump. So what we were looking at this workshop that people paid hundreds of dollars to go to was a tree that someone had cut down, and then these sprouts came up around it. Now, there may actually have been, you know, some kind of power vortex going on here, but that was not the observable reality. The people in that group had no basis in reality. They had a concept planted in their mind, and that's what they embraced forever. And although there may have still been this power vortex in the center of this thing, they're going to have a misunderstanding of the actual reality of how nature works, how planet Earth works. We want to observe what's really there. And when we observe what's really there through deductive reasoning, through gathering more evidence, eventually what will happen is a concept will be given to us from this particular picture. This particular picture shows us right here We have the evidence. We've observed. Redwood tree was cut down. We know a little bit about the behaviors of redwood trees. They sprout from the base of the stump. And so all of these are actually genetically probably the same tree. There may have been a little bit of a genetic change when a bud opened up. These dormant buds are a survival strategy of redwoods, because redwoods, and we'll talk a lot more about this later on, are a fire-tolerant species, and one of their survival strategies is have these hidden buds under the ground, protected under the ground, so if the top burns off and dies, these buds sprout up, there it goes. So we need to generate our concepts based on the reality of what we actually observe, and not take our concepts and lay it down on reality. What do we see here? What we can see is what we actually see is all the branches on the tree, this is a spruce tree, for some reason are all pointing to the right. So they're all pointing to the right. And look at this little clump of bushes down here that were mostly blueberry bushes. They're all kind of leaning to the right here. So if we were to take a concept and lay it on top of it, let's say that this is actually facing a harbor off to the screen right. They're all reaching their arms out to greet the people coming off the ship. That's a concept that I just laid on this picture that fails to describe the actual forces that might have shaped the destinies of these trees. This is an example of what's called wind flagging. We can observe this phenomenon over and over and over again. Once you have regular winds above a certain miles per hour, I believe this state of wind flagging, you'll be able to see this like half tree kind of thing at around, I think that one's around 13 miles an hour. There's a whole entire scale of wind degrees. You can look at this tree and you figure out what the scale is, and it'll show you the degree of wind flagging, and you can know the average wind speed and the average wind direction on this site that's historically. If we look at this tree over here, if this tree is 150 years old, we know that for 150 years there's been a prevailing wind from screen left blowing to the right at a certain miles per hour, so much so that it changes all of the characters on this site. If you're going to try to do a permaculture project on this site, and you think that you have to sit down and observe this site for a long time before you do anything, you observe it, you think you learn something, then you go plant bananas, well, you've missed the whole point, because what we're looking at here is this is a white spruce. By knowing the habits of the species, white spruce is a circumpolar species. It'll tolerate 50, 70, 100 below zero. Long winter. It can be frozen solid from mid-September until April, and it can tolerate temperatures up to 110, 115 degrees. It can tolerate fairly dry sites. It can obviously tolerate wind. So just by looking at this tree, we've learned, however old this tree is, let's say 100 years for this one in the background, we've just learned 100 years worth of climate and weather data on this site by looking at those trees. We know what the average wind speeds are, we know what the temperature extremes are, because we have observed nature and we have other examples of where these species survive. We were talking about disturbance. Ecosystems change in species composition and structure and function by being disturbed somehow. This is a picture from a week ago at my farm. A week ago we had 10 inches of rain overnight, and 100 acres upstream from my property came roaring down the valley and washed away some of this is my lowest valley crossing on New Forest Farm, southwest Wisconsin, and it really started to erode this channel over here. How did I know that a flood came through? Well, one, I saw it. Well, two, I didn't have to see it. I could look at the evidence. You see the grass leaning over it, and I can tell because the grass is leaning over that this was a relatively recent event. Grass, this will respond in less than a week, and it'll be standing back up as a tuft of grass. Trees are a different story. They'll stay leaned over like this, and depending on how damaged the trunk or the roots were, it may stay leaning over. But I know this hasn't been leaning over for more than a year, because if it was leaning over for more than a year, this shoot would be going straight up to the sun. This is how the plants respond to disturbance. So by understanding disturbance and about understanding how it affects our site. And I have a slide later that says this. Understand how the disturbance affects that site, what it does to the species composition, what it does to the structure. This is all part of the structural thing. And the function, obviously, extra water, damaged broken trees, new nutrients perhaps, silt, etc. Well, what's fascinating about this picture, that was last week. So Tuesday night into Wednesday was when the big rains came at 10 inches. Thursday it didn't rain much all day. I spent the day recovering, rounding up livestock, fixing the fence and all that kind of stuff. Then on Friday it rained again and it did this. This is the same site, slightly different angle. So what was, if you see this piece of foliage right here, that piece of foliage right there is this. And so if we see where this trunk of the tree is, we see where the erosion was like that. Then after just one more day of rain, and this has moved 18 to 20 feet upstream. This was only a 3.5 inch rain, but everything was super saturated and the water just roared. Well, what we can see, all these branches, this is that broken branch, obviously there, and see how this broken branch does have a chute that's going straight up, and this trunk is kind of going this way, and these are almost going straight up. I think that this was knocked over by water a year ago, 2 years ago maybe, and the chute goes up. So by looking at the evidence provided to us, we see stones here, jagged, coarse stone. These are not smooth pebbles. If you've been to like a mountain stream in New Hampshire or high up in the Rocky Mountains where the stream's been there for a long, long time, these rocks have been tumbled. They've had silt and grit that's pounded against it for a long, long time. The stones are smooth and round. These are jagged chunks of boulder that have been freshly broken out of the ground. So if I come up to this site, I'm going to buy this piece of property and say, oh yeah, you know, this never floods or whatever. It's like, no, this place floods quite regularly. At least 2 years ago, it flooded like this before. What we can see, some of these larger rocks have moss on it, so these ones haven't moved. So we haven't had a flood big enough to move this one, but we've had floods big enough to move this one, because a rolling stone does not grow moss. So just by looking at the evidence, understanding how moss works, how trees grow, how they respond to being bent, how they respond to being broken, how they respond to having a silly little Chihuahua dog that keeps showing up. This is Cowboy Bill. He's about to move to Colorado, so look for him out there. And so we need to understand what the disturbance does to the system, what it actually does, and then how that affects the current system. That new silt and that new debris back here, how is that going to affect the grass that was buried, first of all, in that nice soft silt that we saw in the previous picture, this stuff. This might have actually brought extra nutrients, and the grass might be growing more vigorously. But then once we get here, we've buried it perhaps too deep and under rocks. Well, now we've had this mixing of soil layers. Well, that's right. Permaculturists say you can't mix the soil layers. It's against the law, and you're going to destroy things. Well, nature mixes soil all the time. So now we have this new mix of minerals in here. The soil life is going to respond a different way. And one of the things about Elaine Ingham, who's on the webinar tomorrow night, she's basically the woman who almost single-handedly brought soil biology into the common awareness of how important soil biology is for the health of plants and especially crops. If it wasn't for her tireless work, it wouldn't be as popular as it is today. It's been known about the scientific communities for long periods of time, but nobody's pushed it as being important until she came along. So we need to know how it affects the system and then what the new conditions are created, and that will tell us how we choose to interact with our site. The disturbances can create new landforms, rearrange the parent material, debris deposit, sand dunes. We'll see some of that later. Changes the light. If it rips openings in a site, it'll affect the competitiveness of what's there. I mean, if I'm a little tree and I've been ripped and torn like this, I may not be able to spring back as fast as grass can, or one kind of tree grows faster and now shades this out, and so on. We need to understand how this site will now change. Guaranteed, there's going to be a whole flush of new little annual plants coming in here. Annual plants are part of the economy of nature. Any seeds of giant ragweed, foxtail grass, immediately, poof, they'll sprout right up in here. We have velvet leaf is another one of our common weeds. All kinds of burdock will probably sprout in here. I just pulled a thing out of my sock. I don't know what these are. I have a bad word for them. I'm not going to use it on the air. So once we observe over and over again, understand what the evidence is telling us. We've observed our site right here. We have a long site record. Now, a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight are biological legacies. Any disturbance usually leaves biological legacy. A ginkgo tree that was like 100 meters from ground zero at Hiroshima when the atomic bomb went off. It got burned to a crisp, and because it is a fire resistant species, it was able to survive, and it sprouted out new buds, and it was so impressive that everybody, picked that as a very important place of spiritual renewal, and they built a temple around it. We need to look at our legacies and learn from the biological legacies. They will teach us a lot about our site. Also, the physical legacies. If you have pit and mound, the classic pit and mound topography, one of the most common landscape features. Erosion features, like I showed previously, and I'll show some more again. Just the shape of the land itself is a physical legacy of how that area was created. Where I live in southwest Wisconsin, of course, we're surrounded by the Midwest, which is about as flat and boring as can be. I can't stand it. After the glaciers, the idea was that as the ice melted, there was a certain amount of uplifting, and all this extra water roared through and it carved these canyons. As you drive through southwest Wisconsin right now, you say, oh, what nice hills and valleys. But if you look at it from an aerial photography, it's not hills and valleys. It's a canyonlands, about an 80-mile radius canyonlands in southwest Wisconsin, a little bit of Minnesota, Iowa, and Illinois. That's a physical legacy that told us how was this land shape formed. So where I live right here was formed by catastrophic rainfall events, carving up massive amounts of debris, possibly very, very fast. 2 or 3 years ago, there was a 1.5 mile section of one of the bluffs that just let go, and it buried like 4, 5, 6 houses and all of the railroad tracks, which was really critical because it was a time of year when they were shipping a lot of corn out of Wisconsin and wheat out of Minnesota, and they were down for, I think over a month just clearing off all the debris. Understand your biological legacies, and you'll learn a lot about the temperature regime, the moisture regime, prevailing winds, soil types. You'll learn a lot about the soil chemistry because certain trees will not survive with certain soil chemistry. You'll learn a lot about the soil biology because the above-ground biology and the below-ground biology are intimately connected. You learn about how the rain falls, how catastrophic it falls. So if you want to observe your site, start observing the physical legacies and the biological legacies of your site. I already mentioned that it tells you all the temperature extremes, rainfall patterns, soil wind patterns, fire regime, etc. And we'll see this one again, but just quickly, I already saw this. Well, first of all, there's a redwood tree. Well, redwoods are found in a certain climatic range. They have these high temperatures and low temperatures. They usually have lots of moisture available in wintertime, but they have to survive a big, long, dry summer, so they need to store lots of water in their trunk and in their roots. They have a real thick bark to resist fire. And oh, look at this. This one even has evidence of being burned. So we just learned 5,000 years worth of history by looking at this one picture. I don't have to sit down and wait for 5,000 years to know what the proper ecological response to this site is. There's a certain set of conditions, a certain set of weather conditions, climate conditions, topography, and there's a certain suite of species that will thrive in these conditions. And we can look in nature and find out what those species are, pick the ones that have value as food, feed, medicine, fiber, something that we can sell, trade, carve, work into a craft, plant those as a system. And we know that if with minimal care, they'll be there 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years. If we planted a system based around the redwood, we know that it can be there for 5,000 years with no kindness from humans. It's probably only abuse. Obviously abuse here because it's all been cleared to do what? Plant wheat. These idiots. Sorry, pardon my German. And they left a little stand in the middle because it's pretty. What do we see here? Once again, let's observe the observable phenomena. We have a redwood tree. The thick bark. We saw the previous one. This is the same place. The same place right here. Here's a stump. Once again, somebody cut these redwood trees down. We also know that if you've got some redwood trees like this, redwood trees don't just show up all by themselves. They're a gang. They cover, thousands of square miles all together as a forest. They're a forest community. they're not really a clump community. So some kind of disturbance happened. The disturbance happened, probably about this long ago, however fast redwood trees grow. Actually, I was surprised to learn how fast they actually do grow. Because then there was a little historic data that this particular area was first settled in 1870s, 1880s, big time. And it wasn't for the redwood trees. It was for gold and silver. It was a really wealthy mineral area, and they just used the redwood as timber for building materials and so on. So this was about, say, 130 years old, this tree right there. So we learn a lot just by knowing, we know that, so these trees, 130, well, maybe this was 2,000 years. So you get for the last 2,000 years, these guys have been shedding bark. They've been exuding certain sugars into the soil that make certain soil life. They've been dropping needles, which has a certain chemical reaction on the soil. We can understand and know that we're going to see things like gooseberries and currants. We're going to see blackberries and raspberries in association with this, and we're going to see a lot of fungi in association with this because it's a shaded closed canopy forest type. So we can cut it all down, amend the soil and grow corn, or we can say, look, we can grow gooseberries and grapes. It's amazing. It was an amazing sight going to this place, and what I saw, I don't think that I'm seeing anything special. This to me seems like, shouldn't everybody just know this stuff? And what these are the fire adaptation and adaptation strategy of the redwood. These are all the stump and the basal sprouts coming up from the ground. So part of what stimulated this particular thread a number of weeks ago, we're talking about disturbance, but I want to tie it directly to our management. What makes a restoration agriculture different than a run-of-the-mill permaculture or a regenerative or a savory this or whatever organic, pure organic? The difference is that we are designing as ecological in agriculture as we possibly can. We are going to design absolutely everything after the ecology of the place. So I got to my farm 20 years ago. This picture was only taken like a week or so ago. And this is a gigantic sugar maple tree. And when we got the farm 20 years ago, everything around except this gigantic sugar maple was grass shorter than this. It was grazed as close as a golf course green. This is actually the acre that I first grew my first crop of squash on back in 1995. So you see this gigantic sugar maple tree. One of the things that we notice here's the center of the trunk. Notice that there's more vegetation, more branches, longer branches. There's more of this big, huge, leaning shape on the right-hand side than there is on the left-hand side. What do you think that tells us? Well, let's look at the picture again. What do we observe? I observe that this appears to be a lighter color, as if maybe the sun is over here. Notice how the sky is bleached out, and this is lighter over here. So it looks to me that this tree has been getting the most of its solar gain from this particular side here, and as it grows through time, it just keeps growing and deploying more leaves facing the sun. And over here in the shade, it's like, yeah, we got some leaves out there, but not too much. We don't really, there's not a lot. They're reaching and trying, but they keep deploying leaves. This automatically tells us where the most effective sunshine is coming on this site. We don't have to put up gnomon boards and little sun tracking, this and that and the other thing. Just look at the vegetation. It'll tell you how to orient things. So which way do you think I oriented my house for solar gain? Yeah, you're right. Exactly like this, unless you guessed wrong. A little closer look at this tree, and it's fascinating. One of the things that is known about sugar maple is a late successional plant. We've talked about succession earlier. It actually is extremely shade tolerant, and it actually requires shade in order to get sprouted. So this tree sprouted in the shade, we know, because it's a sugar maple. 99% of them won't sprout out in an open field. It won't sprout in the desert, etc. So somehow, at one point in time, about these many years ago, and by talking to local foresters and sawmills, I learned really quickly that a tree of this diameter, it's about 38 inches diameter at chest height, is about 300 years old. So that we know that 300 years ago, this tree sprouted in the shade of other trees. Well, late successional in this region meant it was coming up underneath maybe ash and oak, maybe it was underneath basswood, maybe it was underneath other maples. But we know at least that 300 years ago, this was a closed canopy, fully shaded forest. And part of how we know that is, one, that's where the sugar maples sprout, and two, it grew straight and tall to reach for the sun. There was no sun anywhere else except straight up until it was about 20 foot tall. Then it could start to put out branches. Anybody who knows the typical branching pattern of a sugar maple, you see this kind of big upright V's, you see this dendritic V pattern here? It's reaching up. So that's what sugar maples look like. And these branch angles aren't the strongest in the world. So what we also see is at some point in time when this tree was probably, add this tree trunk to this tree trunk, so 24 feet tall, somehow now there's catastrophic winds that maybe snapped a branch, and then it tried to grow up again, and it tries to grow up, and these tips keep snapping off. So what does that tell us? Then we got another huge branch like that snapped off and snapped off. What this has told us, and too bad it didn't get another few inches taller on this tree up the top of the screen. This is basically a 300-year record. So let's go 250 years, because if it was in a forest, so maybe 250 years ago, something happened and the forest disappeared. Somebody cut it down, a fire got out of control and it killed all the stuff around it. And all of a sudden it was released to be in the wide open. Well, now that it's in the wide open, it can reach up to the sun. And now that it's wide open, it's exposed to the catastrophic storm winds, which in our area primarily come from the southwest, because these are all pointing northeast. So already we've learned that it was a forest 250 to 300 years ago. What kind, we don't necessarily know. So it was shady conditions. Sugar maple will tolerate 50 below 0 Fahrenheit up to 110 or so Fahrenheit, so we know about the temperature range. It prefers 30 to 60 inches of rainfall a year, so we know it's somewhere in that band. So you're going to get somewhere between 30 and 60 inches of rain a year. We know that catastrophic winds come from the southwest. Catastrophic winds from the southwest in the northern hemisphere are usually frontal storms. So we have a lot of these big, huge frontal like thunder and lightning clouds, convective clouds that snap it off, pushing it to the northeast. So look at how much information we gathered just from this tree, hundreds of years worth of information just by observing it. So because I know the temperature range is going to be between 50 below and 100 above, am I going to plant something that's subtropical? No, that's just totally ridiculous. Even if I'll push the limits, I'll try to extend the range of these plants, but I can't get away with growing some pure tropical plants here. I want to see if it's on my next slide. This is another thing I wanted to show. Yeah, look at these branches, how they've grown. These are all snap-offs, because it's just like that little tree we saw in the brook where the water knocked it over, then it reaches up for the sun. This would have been like the top of the tree, just broke right off, kaboom, and it all tries to grow back up to the top again. One of the things that we can see not so clearly in the other picture, but here, notice there's kind of a line. The bark comes down this way, and all of a sudden the bark is different. All of this bark down here, it's old and rugged, but it's not the same. There's this distinct line that you can see right here. On all trees, here's a stupid question, but it's not. Where do trees sprout? If I take a tree seed, they will sprout either at the soil surface or below the soil surface. Trees typically don't sprout up in midair and send down a root. So what we can tell, this is called a ground line on this tree. What we can tell is the soil used to be up at this high. This is about 3 feet off the ground. So, oh my goodness, what on earth would have removed 3 feet of soil over the lifetime of this tree, over 300 years worth of tree? Could it have been these catastrophic rainstorms? That's possible. This does look like it's kind of a lower depressed area, and as a matter of fact, it is kind of a lower depressed area, so there's probably been some erosion here. The shape of the land will tell us that. But if you go to the other side of the tree, you'll see that this ground line is still up about 1.5 feet off the soil surface. One of the things that happens in most places is even if it's fully grassed over, you will get some soil erosion. Anytime a raindrop hits exposed soil, the finest particles, which are your clays, go into suspension in the water. Then as that water runs away, it's just removed some microfine particles. So 250 years, if this has been grassland for 250 years, 250 years worth of rainfall, catastrophic thunderstorm rainfall, tornadoes, and so on, has eroded about 2 feet of soil. Now, the subsoil beneath it, underneath a prairie, if this has been prairie, which it probably was, because if we go 150 years back is when Europeans first showed up, and that's what they found in this area, was mostly savanna in this part of Wisconsin. So this would have been a maple tree out in the middle of savanna. It's a little bit uncharacteristic for a maple, except that it tells us how it got there. Sprouted in a forest, the soil was this deep, grew up surrounded by other trees. Somehow some disturbance came by, removed the other trees. It became a big, round, open-grown tree, exposed to the storms that broke its top off. So I got 300-year history lesson just by learning how to observe, understanding this species, how it acts. I learned about the weather, the storm patterns, and so on and so on and so on. You guys follow what I'm talking about? This is not coming to an area and saying, oh, let's plant the curved spiral because we'll have things exposed to the sun and exposed to the shade and all kinds of stuff will grow great. The human race has to adapt to this particular planet. Instead of forcing our silly ideas on the planet, let's adapt to how this planet actually works and has been working. And we don't have a lot of time to waste, so we might as well do as best we can to get it right. Once again, this ground line, you can see those eroded soil from it. Here's a little seedling of a pecan, just to show you what a ground line looks like in a smaller seed. And when you get seedlings, whether you plant in the spring or in the fall, look down at the root. You'll notice the bark comes down, and there's usually a distinct line. This is the ground line. So somewhere in here, this is probably a grafted pecan. So there's the ground line of the original tree. They put in a bud graft and then it sprouted up. Look for your ground line and do your tree a favor, bury it a little deeper, bury it. Don't go too far above the ground line. Some species can't tolerate that at all. Others can. So maybe 300 years ago, somebody planted this maple tree out in the middle of the field. I don't know. It seems pretty unlikely to me. Here's another example that I think is pretty fascinating. We look at this tree, obviously sweet, we see a lot of erosion. Now here's something